I was sitting by myself at a quiet dinner spot, the same place my late wife and I went to every single Friday night for over 30 years. That's when I noticed a pregnant server, and something about her looked heartbreakingly familiar. The second she looked up, my stomach dropped. It was my daughter-in-law, the woman everyone believed had walked out on my son a few months back. As soon as she recognized me, she turned and bolted straight into the kitchen. I went right after her, desperate for answers. But behind those swinging kitchen doors, what she shared completely shattered the life I thought I knew. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here. Do me a favor and drop a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. Oh, your replies mean a lot to me. Now, before we jump into the rest of the story, I should mention that certain elements have been framed for narrative and educational purposes. The names and places are coincidental, but the underlying lesson at the end is something I truly believe you need to hear. For 31 years, every Friday evening, Margaret and I would sit in the same corner booth at Lou's Diner, right at the corner of Broad and High Street in Columbus, Ohio. She always got the pot roast, and I always went with the meatloaf. We'd squabble over the same little things every time. Whether the coffee was too weak, if the booth cushions were past their prime, or if the server in the red sneakers was flirting with the line cook. Simple, everyday bickering. The kind of small stuff that acts like mortar between the bricks of a long marriage. Margaret passed away 3 years ago, but I still go every Friday. I still sit in that corner booth. I still order the meatloaf. My name is Harold Mercer, though most folks call me Hal. I'm 67 years old. Over 35 years ago, I built Mercer freight lines from the ground up. It started with just one pickup truck and a handshake deal hauling furniture around Columbus. Today, the company operates 42 rigs across 6 Ohio counties, holds 3 federal logistics agreements, and oversees an asset portfolio valued at $68 million, including warehouses, real estate, and long-term transport contracts. I'm not bringing up numbers to brag. I'm telling you so you understand what was on the line, and how close I came to losing everything before I caught on to what was happening behind my back. On that particular Friday night in late November 2024, I didn't feel like a man managing a multi-million-dollar company. My right hand was trembling slightly as I reached for the laminated menu. That menu had been in use at Lou's since 1987, complete with the same grease smudge in the corner of page 2. I'd been trying to hide that subtle shaking for 3 months. My physician, Dr. Patterson, put it down to high blood pressure combined with age-related fatigue, adjusting my prescription twice. But these sudden spells of lightheadedness kept creeping up on me. The disorientation was always worst in the morning, usually about an hour after my first cup of coffee. "Doing all right tonight, Hal?" Darlene, the Friday night server, asked as she stopped by with a pot of decaf. She was 53, built sturdy, looking every bit like someone who'd carried heavy trays for 3 decades. Which she had. "Can't complain," I said, turning my cup upright. "Usual for me tonight, Darlene. Meatloaf and a glass of water." "Coming right up," she murmured, scribbling on her pad. "Green beans or corn?" "Green beans." Margaret always went with the corn, she noted gently. "I know," I replied. "I'll take the green beans." She topped off the sugar caddy and moved to the next table. I looked out the window. As the dark November night settled against the glass, there were maybe a dozen vehicles parked outside. Minivans, pickups, and an old Buick with a cracked taillight. Lou's isn't the kind of place people visit to show off. People come because the portions are solid, and nobody asks unnecessary questions. My son, Nathan, had called earlier that afternoon. Lately, he'd been calling almost every afternoon, claiming he was just checking in to see how I was feeling, asking about my appetite, and making sure I was resting. 3 months back, he started bringing me a morning coffee from Rosie's Bakery on Fifth Avenue every single day. A large, dark roast, black. He told me it was his way of looking out for me after Margaret passed. I felt genuine gratitude for it, the warm, sincere feeling a father gets when he believes his adult child is finally taking an active interest in his well-being. I turned the coffee cup in my hands, thinking about Nathan. He's 38, stands as tall as I do but leaner, with Margaret's deep eyes, and her habit of tilting his head slightly when listening, or pretending to listen. He'd worked at Mercer Freight Lines for 9 years, running our regional contracts and managing vendor relationships. Sharp, ambitious, sometimes overly ambitious. 2 years ago, he pushed hard for a major expansion, wanting to bid on a federal contract that required 12 new trucks. It would have stretched our capital far too thin, so I turned it down. After that, he quieted down. The kind of quiet a father easily mistakes for maturity. The chime above the front door rang. A table of 4 near the window burst into laughter over something on a smartphone. Darlene called out a pickup order to the back. I reached for my water glass, and that's when I heard it. Footsteps coming from the kitchen's front side of the counter. Slow, heavy footsteps for someone that young. The kind of stride that carries more than just physical weight. It carries a deep, emotional burden. Without thinking, I looked up. A young woman stepped through the kitchen's swinging door, carrying a tray of water glasses. She wore the standard Lou's uniform. Dark pants, a burgundy polo shirt, and a white apron, tied twice around her waist, though it could barely cover her noticeably rounded belly. Her dark hair was gathered in a bun, with loose strands falling to one side. Above her non-slip shoes, her ankles were swollen. Every step was deliberate, showing the quiet effort of someone trying to hide her discomfort after working an 8-hour shift. She was at least 7 months pregnant. I watched as she carefully placed water glasses on the table next to mine without spilling a drop. Her jaw was set in concentration, and even while working with one hand, her free hand instinctively rested near her stomach. Then she turned slightly toward the light. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard it caught in my throat. I recognized that face immediately. The line of her jaw, the way her left eyebrow sat just a fraction higher than the right. The small mark above her lip. The one she told me about 3 Thanksgivings ago, explaining how she'd fallen off a bicycle as a kid. That had been her first Thanksgiving with our family. She'd been so nervous back then, laughing a little too quickly at my jokes, holding Nathan's hand under the table like a lifeline. "Claire," I called out. The name slipped out before I could stop myself. It was barely above a whisper, just loud enough to cross the 4 feet between us, but she heard it. Her head snapped in my direction. For one frozen second, her eyes met mine. In that brief moment, I watched the color drain from her face completely. Then she turned, pushed open the swinging kitchen door, and vanished into the back. Before my brain could process what was happening, my legs had already moved me out of the booth. I followed her, right through that swinging door, entirely unbothered by the fact that customers weren't supposed to be in the kitchen, unconcerned about being a 67-year-old with bad knees and an unsteady heart, and completely forgetting the glass of water and half-eaten meatloaf sitting back at the corner booth, where Margaret and I used to debate over coffee. None of that mattered anymore. The atmosphere of Lou's kitchen hit me instantly. The steam from the dishwasher, the heavy smell of deep fryers, the clatter of pans, and line cooks calling out orders over the hum of fluorescent lights flickering over stainless steel counters. I spotted her right away. Claire hadn't made it far. She was standing in the dry storage area at the very back of the kitchen, her back pressed against a shelf of canned tomatoes, her hands resting over her belly as her chest heaved with quick, anxious breaths. "Claire," I said, keeping my tone gentle, the way you'd speak to someone standing near a ledge. "Look at me. It's Hal. Just Hal." She shook her head, leaning back harder against the shelf. "You need to go back out front, Mr. Mercer. Please. I really can't deal with this right now." "You're trembling," I pointed out, because she was shaking all over, and not from the cold. "I'm fine," she insisted, her voice breaking slightly. "I'm fine. I just need you to leave." "Claire." I took a careful step closer, keeping my hands visible at my sides. "I'm not going anywhere. And I'm certainly not here to drag you anywhere, or force you to talk to Nathan." That made her pause. Her breathing stayed fast, but her eyes locked onto mine, filled with an equal mix of fear, exhaustion, and a faint glimmer of hope. It was the look of someone who had been running for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to stop. "Miss Cho," I called out without turning around, sensing another presence in the kitchen the moment I stepped inside. A woman emerged from behind the prep station. She looked to be American woman, with a small frame and a steady demeanor, carrying the effortless authority of someone who had run that kitchen for decades. She looked at Claire, then looked at me, taking in the situation with a calm, discerning gaze. Here was someone who had seen plenty of complicated situations in her life and knew how to read a room instantly. "Are you family?" she asked directly. "Father-in-law," I replied. She evaluated me for a solid 3 seconds. Then she untied her apron, hung it on a wall hook, and said, "Follow me." Her name was Linda Cho, and she'd owned Lou's Diner for 22 years. She guided us past the industrial dishwasher and walk-in cooler, down a narrow hallway, smelling of cardboard and dried spices, and opened a door I'd never noticed before. The room was tiny, cramped for the three of us. Against one wall sat a small folding cot, neat with a flannel blanket and a thin pillow. An overturned crate served as a makeshift nightstand, holding a water bottle, a phone charger, and a tube of lotion. A single hook held a winter coat, while a couple of shopping bags contained a change of clothes. On the pillow lay a worn, spiral-bound notebook. I stood motionless at the doorway for a long moment. "She came to me in mid-November," Linda said behind me, her voice plain and straightforward. The tone of a person who believed laying out facts was kinder than offering empty sympathy. "Knocked on the back door at 6 in the morning, asking if I needed kitchen help." I could tell she was expecting, so I asked how far along she was. She said nearly 7 months. Linda paused. Before that, she'd been sleeping in her car for 3 weeks. The breath left my lungs. "In November," I said, my voice sounding thin and raspy. "In November," Linda confirmed. I gave her the storage room and offered her shifts. "She works hard, doesn't complain, and never asks for a handout," Linda added, looking at Claire instead of me. "And she made me promise not to tell a soul she was here." Claire sat on the edge of the cot, one hand supporting her lower back, the other resting on her stomach. She avoided my eyes, staring at a fixed spot on the floor. Her jaw was set, her eyes rimmed with red, though there were no tears left. She looked like someone who had cried herself entirely dry long ago. "Claire," I managed to say, my voice straining despite myself. "You're expecting, and you were sleeping in your car in November." "I managed," she said quietly. "The car heater worked. That's not." I caught myself and started over. "You know what I mean." She finally looked up at me. "What would you have me say, Mr. Mercer? That I should have made different choices? Maybe I should have. But I had nowhere else to go, and Nathan would have tracked me down. I couldn't go back. I couldn't." Her voice caught, a small sound escaping her throat before she closed her lips and took a slow breath to compose herself. "I couldn't risk him finding out about the baby. Not until I had gathered enough proof." "Proof of what?" I asked. She reached out and picked up the notebook from the pillow, holding it tightly against her chest like it was the most valuable thing in the room. And I was beginning to realize it probably was. "Proof to protect the two of us," she said. I looked at the notebook, then back at her face, at the dark circles under her eyes, her quiet resolve, and the way she sat upright, despite every line of her body showing absolute exhaustion. Then I looked down. Tucked slightly beneath the edge of the cot, visible in the dim light, was a pair of women's dress shoes, cream-colored satin wedding shoes. They were wrapped neatly inside a sealed plastic bag, placed carefully against the baseboard as if kept there intentionally. My throat tightened. Those were the shoes she wore when she married my son. Here she was, 7 months pregnant, staying in a small room behind a diner kitchen, working 10-hour shifts on swollen feet, yet keeping those shoes with her through everything. "Claire," I asked softly, "when Nathan pushed you out, what did he tell you?" Her chin lifted slightly. Her gaze met mine with a quiet firmness that clearly took effort. "He didn't say anything to me, Mr. Mercer," she answered. "He simply changed the deadbolts while I was out at a prenatal appointment. When I got back, my key wouldn't work. There was a single box with some of my things sitting on the porch." She paused, and a note saying the marriage was over, telling me not to contact him or anyone in his family ever again. The fluorescent light overhead flickered slightly. Somewhere in the kitchen behind us, a timer beeped without anyone turning it off. "He told me you walked away," I said. "He told all of us you left on your own, claiming there was someone else." Claire showed no surprise or anger. She simply gave a slow nod, as if she had rehearsed this exact conversation in her head 100 times. "I know what he told you," she said, "and I know you believed him." She hesitated. "I don't hold it against you, Mr. Mercer. He's very convincing." She opened the spiral notebook to the first page and held it out toward me. "But I need you to see this," she said. I wrote down everything. Every date, every dollar, every name. Her finger rested on the neat, precise handwriting on the first line. Because I knew that eventually, someone would need to know the truth. Linda Cho quietly closed the door behind her as she stepped out, reducing the kitchen noise to a muffled hum. The light fixture overhead gave off a steady buzz. Claire remained on the cot, holding the notebook, while I pulled over the room's single plastic chair to sit opposite her, close enough that our knees nearly touched. "Tell me everything from the start," I said. "Not just for my sake, but for yours. Lay it all out for someone who's actually listening." Claire took a deep breath, setting her jaw firmly to steady her voice after holding it all in for so long. "It didn't happen all at once," she began, her tone measured and careful. "That's what makes it so hard to explain to people. You don't just wake up one morning. and find your spouse has become a complete stranger. It happens bit by bit, tiny details, so minor that every time you notice something, you convince yourself you're just overthinking. What was the first thing? I asked. My health coverage, she said. During a doctor's visit in August, the receptionist told me my coverage had been canceled. I assumed it was just an administrative error. She turned the notebook to a bookmarked page. Her handwriting was small and orderly, with dates listed neatly down the margin. I called the provider from the parking lot. They informed me I'd been removed from the policy back in May. 3 months prior. Nathan had never mentioned a word. My stomach tightened. He cut off your health coverage while you were expecting. I was 11 weeks along, she said quietly. Yes. She flipped another page. In September, he took my name off the lease for the townhome. I only found out when the landlord called to confirm the change. In October, he closed our joint bank account and opened a new one under his name alone. And on November 1st, he updated his emergency contact at the company, replacing my name with hers. Hers, I repeated, the word catching in my throat. Diana. Claire nodded. Diana Cole. She started showing up regularly about 8 months ago. Nathan introduced her as a vendor contact, a representative from one of your logistics partners. She paused. But she wasn't just visiting for business, Mr. Mercer. She was working to squeeze me out, entirely. How long did it take you to realize that? Moff. About 3 weeks after she started coming over for dinner, Claire said, her tone growing firmer. She'd sit at my dining table, eat the food I cooked, and laugh with Nathan, as if I were just a guest in my own home. And Nathan went right along with it. He laughed at her jokes, poured her drinks, and even stumbled over my name twice in one evening before brushing it off. My hands gripped the edges of the plastic chair so tightly I could feel the frame flex under my fingers. Claire. There's more, she continued, her voice gentle but firm. The evening Nathan changed the locks was the day of my 26-week checkup. Everything looked great with the baby. I remember seeing the heartbeat on the screen, feeling so relieved that I actually bought a tea from the hospital lobby machine just to mark the moment. Her voice quieted down. I got home to find my key wouldn't turn. I stood on the porch for 10 minutes, trying it again and again because I couldn't make sense of it. Beside the door was a cardboard box containing a few clothes, my mother's recipe books, and a framed photo from my parents' wedding. She took a slow breath. There was no note. Nathan claimed there was one, but there wasn't. A sharp, cold anger flared in my chest. He told me you walked out, I said, my voice rough and unsteady. He sat across from me at my dining table and broke down, crying. Claire. He actually wept. He told me you'd been seeing someone else for months, emptied the joint account, and disappeared. Claire looked at me calmly, her eyes dry though. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the notebook. How much did he claim I took? $11,000. She gave a short, bitter laugh without any real humor. When he closed that account, there was $412 in it. Mr. Mercer, I saved the bank statements. She turned to the back of the notebook, showing me a folded printout tucked inside. I didn't take a dime. There was nothing to take. I rested my elbows on my knees and buried my face in my hands, my chest heavy with a profound sense of regret. Recalling how I'd sat alone in my kitchen after Margaret's funeral, completely lost, barely able to process the day. I believed him, I admitted into my hands. Heaven. Heaven forgive me. I believed every word he said. I know you did, she replied softly, without a hint of blame, just quiet understanding. He's your son. Of course you wanted to trust him. I dropped my hands and looked up at her. Why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you call me directly? Claire set the notebook on her lap, a mix of sorrow and hesitation crossing her face. I tried, she said softly. I really tried. Back in August, I drove over to your house 3 times, Mr. Mercer. 3 times. She released a quiet breath. Every single time, Nathan answered the door. He told me you were resting, that you weren't feeling well, and that it wasn't a good time. She looked me straight in the eye. And then he said something that terrified me so much I didn't dare try again. I froze. What did he say? She reached into her apron pocket and retrieved a folded slip of paper, worn soft from being opened and folded repeatedly. She handed it over. He left this under my windshield wiper after the 3rd time I came by, she said. Read it. I unfolded the paper. I'd know Nathan's handwriting anywhere. If you come around here again, I'll tell my father you've been making threats. I'll make sure you're placed under evaluation. Nobody is going to take the side of someone with a documented history of emotional distress. You'll lose the child. Walk away now while you still have a chance. The note trembled in my fingers. Not from any physical ailment, but from a cold, sharp outrage that ran straight through me. Claire, I said, my voice dropping low. There's one more thing you mentioned earlier. You said what you needed to tell me was related to my health. I looked up from the note. Explain to me what you meant. She looked at me steadily, her voice calm and absolute. Your morning coffee, Mr. Mercer, she said. The coffee Nathan brings you every single day. She placed her hand over the open notebook. We need to talk about what he's been putting in it. The small storage room felt even tighter than before. I carefully folded Nathan's note and placed it atop the notebook on my lap. The tremor in my hands wasn't from fatigue anymore. It was driven by a disturbing realization that had been settling in my gut ever since Claire mentioned the coffee. Tell me everything, I said. Don't hold anything back. Claire leaned forward on the cot, resting her elbows on her knees, watching me carefully. Like someone about to deliver difficult news, because staying silent was no longer an option. Diana has a relative working at a pharmacy over in Westerville. The name isn't important. What matters is that she knows enough about pharmaceuticals to be dangerous. She paused. Amlodipine, you take that, right? My blood pressure medication, I nodded. Dr. Patterson prescribed it 18 months ago. 5 milligrams once a day. That's a standard dose, Claire explained calmly and precisely. In much higher amounts, say 15 or 20 milligrams, it can cause severe dizziness, constant fatigue that sleep doesn't fix, hand tremors, and confusion. For a man your age, it easily looks like natural decline, like someone whose health is simply catching up with them. She paused, letting the reality sink in. Nathan's been dissolving extra medication into your morning coffee, Mr. Mercer. Back in the 2nd week of September, I saw Diana hand him a small plastic bag in our kitchen. I noted the date. She turned the page and pointed to an entry. September 14th. Nathan took the packet from Diana by the counter. Small zip pouch. White tablets, already crushed. That was the exact week your dizzy spells started getting worse, wasn't it? I felt a sudden hollow chill. Images of the past 10 weeks rushed through my mind. Nathan walking in every morning with that large, dark roast from Rosie's, smiling as he set it on the kitchen counter. Drink up, Dad. Keep your strength up. And there I was, holding the warm cup with both hands, deeply grateful that my son was taking care of me. Merciful heaven. I breathed out softly. I know. Claire's voice sounded tight. I know. I'm so sorry I couldn't find a way to warn you sooner. I kept trying to figure out how to reach you without Nathan realizing it. But every path I thought of, calling, writing, coming to the house, he had blocked. I stood up from the plastic chair, unable to sit still any longer. The room was too cramped to pace properly, but I moved a step or two toward the door and back. I pressed my hand against my chest, my heart beating at a pace Dr. Patterson certainly wouldn't have liked. When did you figure this out? I asked. Late September, she replied. About 6 weeks after I saw Diana hand him that packet. 6 weeks. I stopped and looked at her. Claire, you knew someone was tampering with my health 6 weeks ago? And I spent those 6 weeks putting together a case that would actually stand up, she said, her voice rising slightly with urgency. Mr. Mercer, if I'd gone to the authorities in September with nothing more than what I saw across a kitchen, what would have happened? Nathan would have denied it. Diana would have denied it. And you, she cut herself off. And I would have believed them. I finished the thought for her. She met my gaze without looking away. Yes. I leaned my back against the shelving unit, letting the sturdy frame hold my weight. The cool metal pressed against my shirt. I remembered a morning 2 weeks back when I had to hold onto the bathroom sink for 3 solid minutes, waiting for the room to stop spinning. Convinced I was on the verge of a health crisis. I hadn't told a soul. I was too proud. Tell me about Margaret, I said suddenly. Tell me why you stayed. Claire's expression softened, a warm memory washing over her features. For a moment, she looked just like the young woman Nathan had brought home for Sunday dinner 4 years ago. The girl who laughed quickly at my jokes and held Nathan's hand tightly beneath the table. 2 years into our marriage, things were rough, she shared quietly. Not like recently, just difficult. Nathan was pulling away, and I couldn't figure out why. I'd reached the point where I was ready to call it quits. She looked down at the notebook in her lap. I had divorce papers drafted, kept them in my bag. One Sunday afternoon, I drove over to your place intending to tell your wife I was leaving Nathan. Her voice grew softer. But when I arrived, Margaret took one look at me, brought me into the kitchen, and poured me a cup of tea. She talked to me about you. About how you used to work 7 days a week, forgot anniversaries, and missed her surgery because of a freight deal in Cleveland. My throat felt tight. She told me she'd drawn up divorce papers once too, Claire went on. 32 years ago. She said she tore them up right there at that same kitchen table. A small, quiet smile touched Claire's lips. She told me, a good man can lose his way, dear, but a resilient woman knows how to guide him back, and I believed her. The faint smile faded. I tore up my papers that very afternoon, Mr. Mercer. Right there in Margaret's kitchen. Then I went home and tried harder to make things work. I couldn't find the words. She saved my marriage back then, Claire said softly, and Nathan rewarded her memory by turning our home into something she never could have imagined. I pressed my fingers against my eyes, standing motionless. A heavy, quiet grief settled over me. The realization that the woman I loved had tried to hold everything together, and her kindness had unwittingly left someone else I cared about in harm's way. Margaret saw something worth saving, I finally managed to say, my voice raspy. She was right about that part, Claire. She might have misjudged Nathan's trajectory, but she was right about you. Claire's eyes welled up with tears that glistened under the overhead light without falling. What do we do now, Mr. Mercer? She asked. I straightened up from the shelf. The cold sensation in my chest was gone, replaced by a sharp, clear sense of purpose. For the first time in months, my mind felt completely focused. First off, I told her, "Stop calling me Mr. Mercer. Call me Hal." I carefully took the spiral notebook from her hands. Second, tomorrow morning when Nathan shows up at my door with that coffee, I'm going to smile and say thank you. I met her eyes directly. And then, we're going to make sure every single action receives the full weight of accountability it deserves. Around 11 that night, I drove Claire over to the Fairfield Inn near the airport. I booked the room under the name of Roy Casper, a driver who'd worked for my company for 14 years. He paid cash at the desk and told the clerk it was a private family matter. The clerk didn't press for details. People rarely question a quiet man paying cash who looks like he's had a rough evening. And truth be told, I'd shed a few quiet tears on the drive over. I waited in the lot until the light turned on in Claire's room before pulling out. The drive back home took exactly 22 minutes. I knew because I counted every traffic light along the route. It was a habit Margaret used to poke fun at, saying I turned everything into a structured routine whenever I felt uneasy. She was right. Between the Fairfield Inn and the house on Elmwood Drive, there are 12 lights. Are 12 lights, and I caught 9 reds. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was completely dark. I hadn't left the porch light on when I left. I never thought to do it. That was always Margaret's routine. Even 3 years after her passing, walking into a dark, empty house still brought that quiet, familiar ache. I didn't go to bed. I walked through the kitchen, ignoring the coffee maker and the bag of beans Nathan had left on the counter 2 days ago, and went straight down the hallway to his old bedroom. Ever since he moved out, I hadn't touched much in here. Just a desk, a bookshelf, and a closet full of things he didn't need anymore when he moved into his downtown penthouse. I kept it all. That's what fathers do. We hold on to the evidence of who our kids used to be, long after they've turned into someone else. I sat down at the desk and pulled open the top drawer. Rubber bands, a broken calculator, 2 dried-up pens, and a 2019 Columbus Clippers game schedule. I pulled open the second drawer. Old user manuals and a phone charger that didn't fit anything made after 2015. I pulled open the bottom drawer, the deep one that always stuck on the left side, requiring both hands and a firm tug to open. Inside was a cardboard shoebox I recognized instantly. Nathan's school keepsakes. Report cards, a 4th grade spelling bee ribbon, and a photo of him at 8 years old, sitting on the hood of my very first freight truck, arms wide open, with the biggest smile I had ever seen on a child's face. I set the photo aside, forcing myself not to look at it too long. Beneath it, my fingers brushed against the very thing I didn't even realize I was looking for. It was a plain white envelope, unsealed and crumpled, as if it had been handled many times and then hidden away. There was no name on the front. I turned it over. Inside was a piece of paper folded into thirds, wrapping a smaller piece of glossy photo paper, the kind printed from a pharmacy photo kiosk. I unfolded the small photo first. It was an ultrasound image, the rough, black and white kind from a 12-week checkup. In the center was a tiny curved shape that your brain had to work to recognize as a human being. In the bottom right corner, printed in a small, clinical font, it read, Sutton C., 12 weeks 2 days, July 18, 2024. My grandchild. Already 12 weeks old in this picture, which meant this photograph was taken 4 months before I even knew he existed. My hands trembled so violently that the ultrasound image rattled in my fingertips. I laid it flat on the desk and pressed my palm down on it to make it stop shaking. Then I unfolded the letter. It was Claire's handwriting. Small and neat, just like in her notebook. The paper had grown soft from being folded and unfolded. So many times the creases nearly worn through in 2 places. Dear Mr. Mercer, I drove to your house 3 times over the past month. Every single time, Nathan answered the door before I could even ring the bell. He told me you were resting, that you were unwell and couldn't take visitors. The first time, I believed him. The second time, I wasn't so sure. The third time, I sat in my car at the end of your driveway for 20 minutes before he walked out and told me that you had asked not to be disturbed. I wanted you to know about the baby. I wanted you to know that you were going to be a grandfather. I've wanted to tell you since July, but I couldn't find any way to reach you without Nathan controlling it. I'm so sorry I wasn't strong enough to push past him. I'm so sorry I let him convince me that you wouldn't believe me. I should have tried harder. His name is Lucas, I decided last week. I thought you should know that, too. Claire. Beneath her name, a few lines had been added later in faint pencil, written in a shaky hand. I accidentally left this letter in Nathan's desk when I went back to get my winter coat after he changed the locks. I don't know if he ever found it. I don't know if it even matters anymore to throw it away. I sat there at that old desk in Nathan's dark, former bedroom, holding the letter in both hands. She had driven to this house 3 times. 3 times, just to tell me about Lucas. And 3 times my own son had stood at his father's front door, turning her away with lies. He's resting. He's unwell. He asked not to be disturbed. Meanwhile, I was sitting 20 feet away in the living room, watching the evening news, eating a frozen meal, telling myself I was fine. A burning sensation built behind my eyes until I couldn't blink it away anymore. I pressed the letter flat against my chest and sat in the dark of my dead son's old room, letting the tears fall. I don't know how long I sat there. All I knew was that when I finally stood up, my knees ached, my back was stiff, and the bedroom window had turned from black to a deep, pre-dawn gray. I tucked the ultrasound photo and the letter into the inside pocket of my jacket, right against my chest. Then I walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the driveway. As a car pulled slowly onto Elmwood Avenue, a pair of headlights swept across the garage door. It was Nathan's car. It was Nathan's. He was early this morning. The headlights went dark in the driveway, and I heard the familiar sound of his car door, that soft, characteristic thud of the German-engineered vehicle he had bought 3 years ago for $42,000. That purchase had filled his face with a pride that none of his achievements at Mercer Freight had ever brought him. I walked away from the kitchen window and sat down at the dining table. I folded my hands together on the table, making sure they were steady before the back door opened. "Good morning, Dad." Nathan's voice came first, followed by the man himself. He was tall, wearing a dark coat, balancing a cardboard tray from Rosie's Bakery in one hand, holding 2 large coffees. That was new. He usually only bought one. "You're up early. I saw the kitchen light on when I pulled in." "Couldn't sleep," I said. "Old man's trouble." He set the coffee on the counter, unhurriedly taking off his coat like a man who believed the entire morning belonged to him. He wore a gray Henley shirt and dark jeans. His hair, freshly washed and still slightly damp. He looked well-rested, comfortable. He looked like a man without a single heavy weight on his conscience. Seeing that cut deep into the darkest place inside me. But I took care not to let a bit of it show on my face. I brought 2 today, he said, setting one in front of me. Thought we could finally sit down and have a cup together. Did you eat anything this morning? Not yet, I said. I cupped the paper mug with both hands, feeling its warmth. This will do for now. Nathan pulled out the chair across from me and sat down, stretching his long legs under the table the way he had since he was 15. He picked up his own cup and leaned back. You look exhausted, he observed, watching me with a look of careful concern. More tired than usual. Did that dizziness flare up again yesterday? A little, I said. It's worst in the mornings. He nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he had suspected all along. I've been thinking, Dad, maybe it's time to look into hiring some help. You know, a home health aide. Just someone to come by for a few hours a day. Make sure you take your medicine on time. Make sure you're eating right. He tilted his head slightly, just the way Margaret used to. The resemblance was like a blade, twisting in an open wound. I worry about you living here all by yourself. Thank you, son, I said. I raised the coffee cup to my lips, but I didn't drink. I set it back down, running my thumb along the plastic rim of the lid as if checking whether it was properly sealed. It bought me 3 seconds of natural-looking delay. Actually, you know what? My stomach feels a bit off this morning. I think I'll hold off on the coffee for a bit. A fleeting expression crossed Nathan's face, too fast and subtle for most people to catch. It appeared and vanished in an instant. Sure, he said easily. No rush. We spent the next 20 minutes making small talk about nothing. Contracts coming up for renewal in January. Whether the furnace needed servicing before the dead of winter hit. Whether I had called the company that cleaned the gutters behind the house. It was the kind of normal Saturday morning conversations fathers and sons have all across Ohio. And the entire time, I watched him. I watched his eyes drift toward my coffee cup again and again. I watched his shoulders hold a faint, persistent tension that had nothing to do with what we were talking about. I watched his eyes track that cup every time I shifted in my chair. He looked like a man staring at a face-down card on the table, trying to check if it had been turned over without looking obvious. Boss. After finishing with the furnace and the gutters, there was a brief pause. Nathan finished the last drop of his own coffee, stood up, and tossed the empty cup into the trash. I should get going, he said. I should get going, he said. Got a few things to handle this weekend. He paused by the kitchen counter, nodding toward my untouched coffee. You sure you don't want to drink that while it's hot? I had them make it just the way you like it. I'll leave it for now, I said. I'll heat it up later. He stared at me half a second longer than was natural. All right, Dad, he said. If the dizziness gets worse, call me. I always do, I said. He put on his coat. He grabbed his keys from the counter. He walked to the back door, opened it, and paused with one hand on the frame. I love you, Dad, he said. For 38 years, I had heard those 4 words from my son. This was the first time they made me sick to my stomach. Drive safe, I said. The door clicked shut. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the coffee cup in front of me for a long time. Then I stood up, opened the cabinet under the sink, and pulled out a clean, heavy-duty Ziploc bag left over from a fishing trip last summer. I sealed the coffee cup inside, carefully squeezing out the air, and left it on the counter. Then I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 8 years. Dr. James Howell. Back when Margaret was still alive, we were in the same bowling league. He was a quiet, meticulous man who didn't gossip and never panicked. Exactly the kind of person I needed right now. He answered on the 3rd ring. James, I said. It's Hal Mercer. I need to see you today. Not at the clinic. Somewhere private. I looked at the sealed bag on the counter. And I need you to test something for me. There is a side of Columbus that never makes it into the city's tourism brochures bias. The Eastern Industrial Corridor near Livingston Avenue. The buildings there are low and flat, stained by 30 years of exhaust fumes, with cracked asphalt parking lots held together by optimism and old paint. Mercer Freight had started right in a building 2 blocks off this strip. I hadn't been back to this neighborhood in 6, maybe 7 years. Frank Delgado's auto repair shop was at the end of a row of cinder block buildings on Kelton Avenue. A hand-painted sign above the garage door read, Delgado Auto Repair. All makes welcome. One of the letters in welcome had faded until it was barely visible. The door was open, and before I even stepped out of the truck, I could hear the whistle of a pneumatic wrench somewhere inside. I stood in the doorway for a moment. 10 years is a long time. Frank had been my warehouse operations manager for 11 years. He was the guy who arrived earlier than anyone, stayed later than anyone, and never asked for recognition because he was too busy making sure the job got done right. When a competitor came to me with proof that someone inside Mercer Freight was leaking our contract bids, only 3 people had access to that information. 2 of them had been with me from the start. Frank was the newest of the 3. I made the wrong call. I let my lawyers convince me that the evidence pointed to Frank. So on a Tuesday morning, I called him into my office, handed him a termination letter, and didn't ask a single question. He looked at me from across the desk and said, completely calm, I didn't do this, Mr. Mercer. And I said, I'm sorry, Frank. Then I let him walk out that door. For 10 years, I told myself I had no choice. But now, standing outside his shop on a cold Saturday morning with a sealed Ziploc bag in my jacket pocket and my late wife's words echoing in my head, a good man can lose his way. I finally understood that I had simply chosen not to look any harder for the truth. I walked inside. Frank was lying on a mechanic's creeper under a Ford F-150, only visible from the knees down. Work boots, dark canvas pants, and a sliver of exposed wrist as he reached for a tool. The air smelled of motor oil, cold concrete, and the faint, sweet chemical scent of brake cleaner. Shop's full today, he called out from under the truck without looking up. Leave your number on the clipboard by the door. Frank, I said. The wheels of the creeper screeched against the concrete as he rolled out from under the truck. At 63, Frank Delgado looked like a man who had carried a heavy load for a long time and had come to terms with the weight. The hair at his temples had turned silver. His face was lined with the deep grooves of a man who worked outdoors. He looked at me with a completely neutral expression, a socket wrench held loosely in one grease-stained hand. For a long moment, neither of us said a word. Mr. Mercer, he finally spoke, neither warm nor cold, simply stating a fact. I owe you an apology that's 10 years overdue, I said. And I need your help. In that order, if you can spare 5 minutes. He looked at me the way a mechanic inspects an old engine, looking for hidden problems rather than what had already been fixed. Then, he placed the socket wrench on his rolling toolbox and wiped his hands on a rag. 5 minutes, he said. Office. Office is in the back. The office was a converted storage space with a metal desk, 2 mismatched chairs, and a coffee pot that looked older than both of us. Frank didn't offer any coffee. He sat behind the desk, crossed his hands, and waited. I was wrong about you, I said. The bid leak back in 2014. I had 3 people with access, and I picked you because you were the newest. I told myself, the evidence points to you. The truth is, I didn't dig deep enough to see where the evidence actually led, and I let the lawyers push me toward the fastest answer. I looked him dead in the eye. You told me you didn't do it. I didn't ask you a single question after that. That was my fault, Frank. It destroyed an 11-year career, and I have no excuse for it. Frank studied me for a long time. This apology, he said slowly, is about 8 years too late to change anything that matters in my life. He blew out a breath through his nose. But I appreciate that you came and said it to my face instead of through a lawyer. Fair enough, I said. He opened the top drawer of the desk, never taking his eyes off me, as if he had rehearsed this moment in his head longer than I could imagine. He placed a USB flash drive on the metal desk between us. Black, standard size, the kind you could buy in a 3-pack for a few bucks at Walgreens. I've been holding on to this for months, trying to figure out how to get it to you, he said. I looked at the drive. What is this? My buddy Ray works as an accountant for a small freight company in Lancaster. Frank said. About 8 months ago, Nathan reached out to their owner looking to buy the business. During due diligence, Ray noticed some incoming wire transfers that didn't match any legitimate Mercer freight vendor invoices. Before the deal fell through, he pulled those records. Frank slid the flash drive across the desk with one finger. 14 wire transfers over 18 months. Funds moved out of Mercer Freight's operating accounts into 3 LLCs that Ray couldn't connect to any real business activity. My jaw tightened. How much? Ray tallied it up at $1.2 million. The number hung between us like something solid. Frank, my voice came out raspier than I expected. Why didn't you take this to the police yourself? He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. Because, without you, as the business owner, making a complaint, there's no crime to investigate. Ray's records only show that money moved. Without a statement from the owner saying, Zhang, it was unauthorized, it doesn't prove theft. He looked at me with a steady gaze. And because I wanted you to see it first. After everything that happened between us, I figured you had a right to know before the whole thing went public. I picked up the flash drive and gripped it tightly in my hand. Frank, I said, I owe you a lot more than an apology. He shook his head firmly. Don't. Not today. He stood up and picked up his rag again. Go handle what you need to handle, Mr. Mercer. We can talk about the rest later. I stood up and extended my hand. He shook it with a brief, firm grip. It was the handshake of a man who had decided to let something go without pretending it had never happened. I walked back through the shop and out into the cold November air. The flash drive sat in my pocket right beside the sealed Ziploc bag. Together, those 2 small objects were enough to shatter everything Nathan had built on top of my life. I had one last stop to make before dark. Dr. James Howell's private clinic wasn't the kind of place you'd find listed in an insurance directory. It was a converted Victorian house on Brighton Road, with white siding, green shutters, and a small brass plaque by the door that simply read, J. Howell, M.D. James was 55, lean and disciplined, with a habit of running 6 miles every morning, not for fitness, but for time to think. He had spent 26 years practicing internal medicine in Columbus, giving him the unhurried demeanor of a man who had learned long ago that a rush diagnosis costs far more than taking your time. He met me at the side door instead of the main entrance. It was his own suggestion, telling me he had already understood from my phone call that this wasn't a standard visit requiring a clipboard in the waiting room. "You look like you haven't slept in days," he said, holding the door open. "I haven't," I said. "Not really." His examination room smelled faintly of rubbing alcohol, old wood, and the cedar scent of the soap he used. He closed the door, pulled on a pair of medical gloves, and held out his hand for the Ziploc bag without asking for another explanation. "Walk me through the timeline," he said, holding the bag up to the light to inspect the sealed cup through the plastic. 10 full weeks, I said. The dizziness started getting severe around the 3rd week of September. Mornings were the worst, usually about an hour after drinking my coffee. I thought it was an interaction with my blood pressure meds and getting older. I watched him work. Last night, my daughter-in-law told me my son has been dissolving extra blood pressure pills in my coffee. Amlodipine. "High doses, Dramact," she said. James didn't react dramatically. He simply raised his eyes from the bag, locked eyes with me for 2 solid seconds, read whatever was on my face, and looked back down. "Roll up your sleeve," he said. He drew my blood with practiced efficiency, no wasted motion. 3 vials. The touch of the needle against the crook of my elbow was cold and precise. While the centrifuge spun in the next room, he tested the sample from the coffee cup using a portable analysis kit. The kind usually kept locked in a cabinet that most general practitioners never have a reason to open. I sat on the exam table, staring at a framed photo on the opposite wall. It showed a fishing trip somewhere up north. James standing on a dock with 3 other men holding up walleye. Everyone smiling. Margaret had taken a nearly identical photo of me and 2 friends at Lake Erie back in 1998. I hadn't gone fishing once since she passed. "Hal." James's voice came from the doorway of the adjacent room. I looked up. His expression hadn't changed. He was too experienced to let his face do the talking. But something in the posture of his shoulders had shifted. The subtle change that happens when a careful man confirms something he desperately hoped was wrong. The coffee sample shows an amlodipine concentrations equivalent to about 15 to 20 milligrams dissolved inside, he said, walking in and sitting on a rolling stool, hands clasped between his knees. "Your prescribed dosage is 5 milligrams once a day. For a man your age, with an existing cardiovascular condition, a single daily dose of 15 to 20 milligrams every morning would produce the exact symptoms you've been experiencing: dizziness, fatigue, hand tremors, cognitive cloudiness." He paused. "If taken continuously over 10 weeks, it also starts placing severe stress on your kidneys and causes blood pressure instability that looks like a natural, age-related decline during a routine exam." The examination room was dead silent. Outside, a car drove past on Brighton Road. 2 houses down, a dog barked once and went quiet. "How bad is it?" I asked. "The damage so far?" "Your blood work will give me a clearer picture, but based on your symptoms and the concentration in that sample." He chose his words carefully. "You need to stop exposure immediately. I assume you already have." "Since last night," I said. He nodded. "I'll put you on a regimen to help your kidneys flush out the excess medication. It's going to take a few weeks." He looked at me directly. "Hal, what you're describing is an intentional, sustained poisoning. You know I have a legal obligation to report this." "I know," I said. "I'm not asking you to cover it up, James. I'm asking you to document everything with absolute precision and give me 72 hours before making an official filing. I need to get my affairs in order first." He studied me for a long time. 72 hours, he said. Not because I agree with this, but because I trust that you know what you're doing. I'm not sure. I do, I admitted honestly. But I know what has to happen. He printed out the preliminary results and handed me the folder. My name was at the top, followed by the numbers. Those numbers turned every single one of Nathan's carefully planned morning visits over the last 10 weeks into a crime with a specific legal name and a prison sentence attached to it. I folded the file and tucked it into my inside jacket pocket, alongside the ultrasound photo and the letter. On the table beside me, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Claire. He just drove past the hotel twice. I saw his car from the window. He doesn't know which room, but he knows I'm nearby. My chest tightened so hard I had to force myself to breathe. I typed back, "Stay in the room. Lock the deadbolt and the chain. I'm on my way." James walked me to the side door. He rested a hand briefly on my shoulder, a gesture from a man who knew there were no useful words left to say. "Be careful, Hal," he said. "I'm trying," I said. I drove home from Brighton Road, intentionally taking the long route down Broad Street instead of the highway. I passed the old Mercer freight depot on Livingston Avenue, past the church, where Margaret and I were married in 1981, and past the elementary grade spelling bee, where Nathan won his 4th grade spelling bee. I had stood in the back of that gymnasium, my chest so full of pride I could barely catch my breath. I was searching for the thread. The single thread connecting the 8-year-old boy grinning on the hood of a freight truck to the man who dissolved pills in his father's coffee every morning for 10 weeks to end his life. Driving down Broad Street, I couldn't find it. I pulled into the driveway and sat in the truck for a few minutes, hands resting on the steering wheel, listening to the engine ping as it cooled down. The porch light was off. I still hadn't learned to turn it on before leaving the house. Inside, I walked straight to Nathan's former bedroom and sat down at the desk. Opening the bottom drawer, the one that stuck on the left, I reached past the shoebox until my fingers found what I was looking for. A folded piece of paper. I had noticed it last night, but set it aside because I hadn't been ready to face it. I unfolded it under the desk lamp. It was written in Nathan's handwriting. From the date in the corner, he had been 19 when he wrote it. During his first semester at Ohio State, right before he dropped out to come work with me. The writing was neat and slightly stiff. The way someone writes when they're trying hard to make their words look proper because it matters to them. "Dad, I want to be just like you, a man who builds things that last." 2 sentences. I had found this note in a birthday card he gave me 20 years ago. I kept it in the drawer because Margaret told me I should. She said one day I'd want to look back at it, that fathers need to hold on to the moments when their children chose them. In a way she could never have anticipated. She was right. I laid the note flat on the desk, opened another drawer, the one I used for current documents, and pulled out the folder Dr. James Howell had given me an hour ago. I spread it open right beside the note. At the top of the medical report was my name. Attached behind it was the beneficiary modification agreement bearing Nathan's name, a $15 million payout upon my death. Filed 6 weeks ago. The exact week my dizziness became severe enough that I had to hold onto the bathroom sink every single morning. The exact same desk. The exact same drawer. A note from a 19-year-old boy wanting to be just like his father. Lying next to a $15 million document signed by a 38-year-old man, betting on his father's life. I pressed my hands flat against the desk and stared at those 2 pieces of paper until my eyes burned. "When on earth did I lose you?" I asked, aloud into the quiet room. The room gave no reply. I reached beneath the desk and pulled out the box Margaret had kept on the bottom shelf of her closet. It was the box I had carried over after she passed, mostly because I couldn't bear to open it, but couldn't bring myself to throw it away either. It contained the items she thought were worth saving: report cards, Christmas notes, a napkin with her lipstick print from our very first date, which she'd secretly kept for 39 years without ever telling me. And at the very bottom, wrapped in a kitchen towel, her old cell phone. I plugged it into the charger I'd left on Nathan's desk. I'd never touched that charger, but it had stayed there all this time, as if some part of me knew I would eventually need it. Reached 3%, then 7, 8, 9. At 11%, the screen lit up, displaying Margaret's wallpaper. It was a photo from Put-in Bay, the summer Nathan turned 16, the 3 of us together. Nathan was sunburned and laughing. Margaret had her arm around his shoulders. I was squinting into the lens, hating the camera as always, while Margaret took the shot anyway. I opened the video folder. 47 videos in total. Birthday parties, holiday dinners. A clip of the backyard after the bad blizzard in 2019, where she narrated like a nature host, complete with terrible squirrel impressions. I watched 30 seconds of it and had to pause, because the sound of her voice hit me right in the center of my chest. I kept scrolling down. Near the bottom, dated 4 years ago on a Sunday in March, I found a video labeled, "N brought Claire home for dinner." Finally, I hit play. The frame was shaky at first. Margaret was trying to get her angles, holding onto the door frame with one hand, as she usually did. Then it stabilized. The camera was pointed down the front hallway toward the front door as it opened. Nathan walked in first, and the look on his face froze me cold. He was terrified. Not of me. In the background, I could see myself coming down the hall, drying my hands on a dish towel. He was terrified of ruining it. His shoulders were slightly hunched, his jaw tight, as he looked back over his shoulder out the door. It was the expression of a man doing something that mattered to him so much. He couldn't quite believe it was actually happening. Claire stepped in behind him. She was 23 in the clip, looking even younger than I remembered. She held a grocery store bouquet of tulips with both hands, clutching them the way people do when they aren't sure what else to do with their hands. She was looking around our house, taking in the framed prints on the hallway wall, the coat rack, the braided rug Margaret had picked up at a church sale. The expression on her face, guarded, hopeful, completely open, was almost painful to watch. Nathan reached back and took her hand. His fingers were trembling. I had forgotten that detail. I'd been in the kitchen when they arrived, and only saw them from down the hall. I hadn't seen his hand shaking. Then Margaret's voice came from behind the camera. Warm, a little too loud, the way she got whenever she was moved by something and trying to hide it. "Hal, get over here! Look at him. He's as jumpy as a long-tailed cat." In the video, Nathan heard her and turned. When he saw her filming, his face shifted into a mix of fondness, embarrassment, and pure affection. "Mom," he said, "put the phone away." "Not a chance," she said. "This is the most important thing to happen in this house since we brought you home from the hospital." Claire laughed, a genuine, surprised sound, and Nathan broke into a smile I hadn't seen on his face in years. I stopped the video. I sat at that desk for a long time, with my hands resting on my thighs, and Margaret's phone lying face down in front of me. Nathan's two-sentence note and Dr. Howell's folder sat side by side beneath the lamp. I wasn't looking for the thread anymore. I had found it. It had been cut from the inside, and the only question left that mattered was what I was going to build with what remained. I picked up my phone and called Eddie Cross. When Eddie Cross picked up at 9 o'clock on a Saturday night, he didn't sound surprised. That meant he either kept strange hours, or people only called him when things were already falling apart. Most likely both. We'd worked together once, 8 years ago, during a vendor contract dispute that turned out to involve one supplier running 3 separate companies under different names. Eddie had unraveled the paper trail in 4 days. I'd paid him well and kept his number. I need surveillance on 2 people starting tomorrow morning, I told him. My son, Nathan Mercer, and a woman named Diana Cole. I want to know where they go, who they meet, and if either of them goes anywhere near the Fairfield Inn on Airport Drive. Timeline? He asked. 72 hours to start. Same rate as last time. Done, he said. I'll wire the retainer first thing in the morning. I hung up and went to bed, though lying down wasn't the same thing as sleeping. Sunday morning came in gray and cold, the kind of November sky in Ohio that looks like it has given up on the idea of sunlight altogether. I was showered and dressed by 7, and by 8:30 I was standing outside Paula Hines' office. Paula had been doing forensic accounting in Columbus for 19 years. 5 years ago, I hired her firm for an internal audit. She caught $60,000 in duplicate vendor payments within a week and presented the findings with the cold efficiency of a weather report. At 45, she was direct. The way people who only deal in numbers tend to be, with zero patience for anything that couldn't be verified. She met me at the door of her building on North High Street carrying a cup of coffee, holding the door open without saying good morning. I appreciated that. Give me the drive first, she said as she sat behind her desk. Walk me through what you have while I load the files. I laid Frank's flash drive, Claire's lined notebook, and Dr. Howell's folder on her desk. I began speaking, and she typed. As she listened, not looking up once. Her fingers moved across the keyboard in a fast, precise rhythm, the habit of someone who had done this long enough for typing to become second nature. For 20 minutes, the only sounds in the room were my voice and the click of her keys, punctuated by an occasional chime from her second monitor flagging items for cross-reference. Then her typing stopped. Hal, she said, take a look at this. I walked around the desk and looked over her shoulder. She had laid out the 14 wire transfers into a spreadsheet. Dates, amounts, destination, account numbers. Every single transfer had gone into one of 3 LLC accounts. She had pulled the LLC filing records from the Ohio Secretary of State database. All 3 of these LLCs, she said, pointing a pen at the screen, were formed within a 6-week window 18 months ago. The statutory agent listed is a woman named Sandra Cole. Cole, I said. Diana Cole's mother, Paula said. Gahanian resident, 71 years old. I strongly doubt she even knows her name is on these filings. She scrolled down. The primary signatory on all 3 operating agreements. The person who actually controls the accounts is registered under the initials DOL. That's Diana. She turned her chair to face me. Nathan signed the transfer authorizations on the Mercer freight side. But the structure of these LLCs, the timing, using a family member as a statutory agent, this wasn't Nathan's idea. I pulled over a second chair and sat down heavily. He's not smart enough for that. He's smart enough, Paula said carefully. But this is a different kind of shrewd. This is someone who has done this before, or studied it so carefully that it comes off as experienced. She turned back to her screen. Let me check Diana Cole's name against the Ohio Business Registry for the past 10 years, she typed, waiting. A short, non-word syllable escaped her throat. Ah, here it is, she said. 2017. Diana Cole, financial consultant for a small manufacturing firm in Akron. The firm dissolved in 2018 with $340,000 in unresolved creditor claims. She pulled up another record. 2019. Different firm, Hamilton County. Same pattern. Diana as consultant. Firm dissolves. Creditors unpaid. $280,000 unaccounted for. She looked at me calmly. She's done this before, Hal. Nathan isn't her first. The room felt smaller than it had when I walked in. She targeted him, I said. She looked for someone exactly like him. Someone with access to a freight company's operating accounts, a father whose trust shares would eventually transfer over, and enough personal resentment to turn a blind eye. Paula nodded slowly. Yes, I believe that's the exact combination she was looking for. I thought back to the night Nathan came home quiet after I turned down his expansion proposal. The dinner 2 weeks later with Diana that he called a work meeting. The slow, steady distance he built, which I had misread as disappointment, telling myself he needed space so I didn't push. I had handed Diana Cole the door, and she had walked right through it. How long to finish the full report? I asked. 24 hours, Paula said. Maybe less. She glanced at Dr. Howell's folder, which she hadn't touched. Hal, is that what I think it is? Medical documentation, I said. Yes. She looked at me for a moment with an expression that wasn't quite pity, but close enough that I had to look away. Go see your daughter-in-law, she said quietly. I'll call you when the file is bound. The Fairfield Inn looked like every other mid-tier hotel along Airport Drive. Tan exterior, automatic doors, a lobby smelling of carpet cleaner, and a continental breakfast area that had shut down 3 hours earlier. In 35 years of run a freight business, I had stayed in 100 hotels like it. But I had never felt such relief walking into one as I did right then. Claire opened the door on the second knock. She had the security chain engaged, revealing only one eye and part of her face through the 2-inch gap. When she recognized me, she unlatched it. Nathan drove past again this morning, she said, stepping back to let me in. Twice. Same silver car, same direction. Slowed down at the entrance both times. He doesn't know which room, I said. Not yet, she said. She looked much better than she had at Rosie's. She had slept, eaten, and changed out of her uniform, though the dark circles under her eyes remained. As she moved, one hand rested near her stomach. That continuous subconscious protective gesture I'd noticed the first time I saw her. I draped my jacket over the desk chair and sat on the edge of the bed facing her. I told her everything. Frank and the flash drive, Paula and the LLC records, Dr. Howell, and the medical folder in my jacket pocket. I laid it out as plainly as a financial report at a board meeting. She deserved that much. And because in this entire mess, she was the only one who had seen it coming before I did. When I finished, she sat quietly for a moment. It wasn't the silence of someone with nothing to say, but of a person fitting the information she already had into the new frame I'd provided. Diana's done this before, she said finally. It wasn't a question. 2 companies, both in Ohio, I said, Same pattern. Claire nodded slowly, her lips pressed tight. About 7 months ago, I heard her on the phone with someone. I thought it was a friend, she said. The setup phase is always the hardest part. You just have to be patient with them. She looked at me. I wrote it in the notebook. Page 31. I didn't know what it meant then. I pictured Diana sitting at my son's kitchen table, patient and unhurried, looking like she belonged there while Claire was made to feel invisible. Claire, I said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me, even if you think the answer will hurt. She met my gaze directly. Ask. The recordings on that old phone. How much did you record? She stood up, walked to the closet, reached for the top shelf, and pulled out a phone sealed in a Ziploc bag with a date written in marker on the front. She handed it to me. 14 months, she said. Starting last September when I heard Diana make that call. I charged the phone at work and told Nathan the charger was a spare for work equipment. She sat back down on the edge of the bed. I couldn't use the recordings directly because I wasn't sure about the law. Ohio is a one-party consent state, which means I could legally record conversations I was part of. But overhearing conversations in my own home was different. She paused. As supporting evidence, alongside Paula's other files, she'll know better than I do how to use them. I turned the phone over in my hand. 14 months. While she was being erased from leases, bank accounts, and insurance policies. While she cooked meals for a woman wearing her clothes. She had sat in her own kitchen with an old phone hidden in a drawer, gathering the evidence that had finally landed in my jacket pocket. Claire. My voice came out rougher than I intended. After you knew about the medication, you stayed in that house for 11 months. Knowing what they were doing to me, knowing you had the baby. I paused, trying to find the words. You took a risk with Lucas to protect me. She lifted her chin. I took a risk with Lucas to make sure that when this was over, you were still alive, she said calmly. There's a difference. My chest tightened so hard it took deliberate effort to draw a breath. I don't know how to. I stopped again. No, you don't need to, she said. Just bring this to an end. I nodded. I set the phone carefully beside my jacket on the desk and stood up. I need to do something that's going to feel wrong, I said. Starting tomorrow morning, I'm going to keep taking Nathan's coffee. I'm going to let him see me look weaker every time he sees me. More tired, more confused, like an old man running out of time. I looked at her. I need him to think he's winning. Greedy people get careless when they think they're close to the finish line. Claire nodded. How long? Paula needs 24 hours to finalize the financial report. Eddie Cross needs 48 hours of surveillance. After that, I picked up my jacket. After that, it's over. The phone on the table buzzed. It was Eddie Cross. I read the text, feeling a cold weight settle behind my breastbone. Target N met with an estate attorney at a private residence Sunday at 4 p.m. Meeting lasted 90 minutes. Additionally, Target D contacted a travel agency to book 2 plane tickets. Destination unknown, departure window roughly 2 to 3 weeks out. I read it twice, then handed the phone to Claire. She read it through. Her face went entirely still, the look of someone whose worst fears had just been confirmed. They aren't waiting, she said. No, I said, they aren't. She handed the phone back to me, wrapping her hands around her stomach. A deliberate, protective movement this time. Then neither are we, she said. No, I said. Neither are we. I bade her good night. Before leaving, I checked the deadbolt and the chain myself, testing them the way my father had taught me to inspect freight loads before driving off. You make sure the load is secure before you drive. I walked out to the truck in the cold parking lot and sat behind the wheel for a moment. 48 hours. I had 48 hours to play the most convincing sick old man in Columbus, Ohio. I started the engine and pulled out onto Airport Drive. 4 days passed in a strange, suspended rhythm. The cadence of a man performing his own physical decline for an audience of one. Every morning, Nathan brought coffee. Every morning, I accepted it with both hands, thanked him, placed it on the counter when his back was turned, and poured it down the kitchen sink. The moment his car cleared the driveway. Every morning, I shuffled a little more noticeably, leaned heavier on the counter, let my sentences trail off as if losing my train of thought. Nathan watched it all with careful satisfaction, like a man monitoring the return on an investment. On Tuesday, Paula delivered her complete report, 43 pages, detailing every transfer, every LLC, every forged authorization. Eddie Cross delivered his surveillance package on Wednesday morning, complete with photos, timestamps, and the name of the estate attorney Nathan had visited on Sunday. Wednesday night, I sat at the kitchen table and arranged everything neatly into an accordion folder. Paula's report, Dr. Howell's medical statement, Frank's flash drive, the ultrasound photo, Claire's letter, and Eddie's surveillance photos. I bound the folder with a rubber band and locked it inside the office cabinet, where I kept the original incorporation papers for the business. Then I called Detective Karen Walsh at the Columbus Police Department. We had crossed paths 3 years ago during a break-in at one of my warehouses. She was thorough and didn't care for theatrics. I have a file to deliver to you tomorrow morning, I told her. Financial fraud, attempted murder, corporate theft. I have the entire paper trail. A pause on the line. What time? She asked. 8 a.m., I said. I'll be here, she said. I hung up and went to check the guest room. The room I had quietly converted last Saturday afternoon, while Nathan thought I was resting. A crib bought from Goodwill, which I'd assembled twice after reading the manual properly. A second-hand dresser. A lamp with a soft bulb. Nothing fancy, and nothing fancy was needed. I stood in the doorway of that small bedroom for a long time, holding the doorframe, remembering Margaret's words. This is the most important thing to happen in this house. My phone rang at 11:47 p.m. It was Claire. I picked up on the second ring. Hal. Her voice was tight, restrained, the sound of someone trying to speak through pain. My water broke. Every thought in my mind cleared instantly. The accordion file, Detective Walsh, Nathan, Diana. All of it was replaced by a single, sharp urgency. How far apart are the contractions? I asked. Already moving toward the front door. They started about 20 minutes ago, she said, and I heard her catch her breath, hold it, and release it slowly. They're 5 minutes apart now. It's moving fast, Hal. I'm calling Roy. Stay on the line with me, I said. Don't open the door for anyone until Roy knocks 3 times. I dialed Roy's number on my second phone while keeping Claire on the line. Roy picked up on the second ring, his voice raspy with sleep, but instantly alert. I gave him the room number and told him to pull up to the side entrance instead of the front. He didn't ask why. In 14 years, whenever my voice sounded like that, he never asked why. As I climbed into the truck and backed out of the driveway, Claire made a sound over the phone that tightened every muscle in my body. It was a sharp, involuntary gasp she tried and failed to suppress. Claire, I said, talk to me. Keep talking. I'm okay, she breathed through her nose in a measured rhythm, Doctor. Park must have taught her. I'm okay. It's just, they're coming faster. Roy is 4 minutes away, I said. I'm 12 minutes out. You are not doing this alone. I know, she said. Then, in a faint voice, almost to herself, I haven't been alone since you pushed open that kitchen door. I pushed the truck to 60 down Airport Drive, not giving a damn about the speed limit. The second phone on the passenger seat buzzed with a text from Eddie Cross, sent 2 minutes earlier. Heads up. Target N just left his apartment. Heading down Route 270 toward your location. Not sure if he found the hotel address or if it's a coincidence. Still following. The light ahead turned green. I pressed the accelerator further down. 12 minutes just became 8. When I pulled into the Fairfield Inn parking lot, Roy was already idling by the side door. That meant he'd been driving before I even called him, which meant he'd been awake and waiting. That was who Roy Casper had been for 14 years. And I had never properly thanked him for it. I left the truck idling at the curb and took the stairs 3 at a time. My knee, injured off a loading dock in 1999 and held together by stubbornness ever since, protesting the entire way up. Room 214. I knocked 3 times. Claire opened the door. She was dressed, bag in hand, bracing one arm against the doorframe. The expression on her face was pure, unadulterated human determination. She was pale, her hairline damp with sweat, her knuckles white, where she gripped the frame, but her jaw was set, and her eyes were clear. Another one just passed, she said. 4 minutes since the last. Let's go, I said, taking her bag. She took my arm, not leaning heavily, but holding on like a lifeline in the dark. We moved down the hall and took the rear stairs to avoid the lobby. I guided her into the back seat of Roy's car, with more care than I had handled anything in my life. Roy had the car moving before I even closed the door. Ohio Health Riverside, I said. Use the McMillan service entrance. Got it, Roy said, accelerating onto Airport Drive without another word. In the back seat, Claire leaned forward slightly, hands pressed flat against her knees, breathing through a contraction. It was the focused quiet of a person who had been told what to do, and was pouring every ounce of strength into doing it. I kept my eyes on the road behind us. No silver car, not yet. Hal, Claire spoke after the contraction eased, her voice raspy. What if he shows up at the hospital? Dr. Park has privacy protocols set up, I said. I arranged it through the hospital's patient privacy office 2 weeks ago. Claire Sutton is admitted under a confidential file. No one outside the approved list gets information, and Nathan Mercer is not on that list. She absorbed that. You set that up 2 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, actually. She turned her head in the dark back seat to look at me. You knew this might happen early. I knew we needed to be ready, I said. It's not quite the same thing, but yes. Roy turned onto McMillan Drive and killed the headlights as he approached the service entry. Those were my instructions from 3 weeks ago, after I'd walked the route myself on a Tuesday afternoon just to be certain. The gate opened as he punched in the code, a code provided after a conversation with the facility manager and a substantial donation toward medical equipment. A donation I didn't regret for a single second. Dr. Susan Park was waiting. She was 50, Korean-American, with the quiet composure of someone who had seen every possible scenario and knew precisely which levers to pull in each one. She was pushing a gurney, accompanied by 2 nurses. In the 4 seconds it took the nurses to take the bag from my hand, she had already assessed Claire. How far apart? She asked. 3 minutes, Claire said. Maybe less. Fully effaced, Dr. Park told the nurses, already moving the gurney. "Let's go." She glanced back at me. "Mr. Mercer, the waiting room is through doors on the left. I'll come get you." "Is she going to be all right?" I asked. The question stripped of all defense, down to raw concern. Dr. Park looked at me with direct, measured honesty. A woman who made no promises she couldn't keep and offered no false comfort. "She's strong, and she's ready," she said. "So is he." Then the double doors swung shut, and they disappeared. I stood in the service hallway. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed at a frequency that felt almost intentionally designed to make everything feel colder and more clinical than it actually was. Roy appeared beside me. "You want some coffee?" he asked. "Lord, no," I said. "Break rooms down the hall," he said. "I'll be right outside." I walked into the waiting room and sat down in a chair designed for easy cleaning rather than comfort. At this hour, the room was empty. A muted TV in the corner showed a home renovation program, a man in a flannel shirt gesturing enthusiastically at a subfloor. I reached into my jacket and pulled out Margaret's phone. I didn't look for videos this time. I opened the Notes app. Margaret had used it like a diary, short entries, undated, whatever came to mind. I had never read them before. It felt like opening letters meant for someone else. But tonight I didn't have the energy to maintain those boundaries. I scrolled down. Most entries were mundane. Grocery lists, excerpts from books she liked, reminders to call her sister, the recipe for the lemon bars she made every Easter that I could never quite replicate. Then, near the bottom of the list, there was a longer entry. The timestamp marked it as 18 months before she passed. I read it slowly. I'm always afraid of the wrong things. I spend my time worrying about Hal's blood pressure, whether Nathan is eating properly, whether the gutters need cleaning before winter. I don't spend enough time on the things that will actually matter. When I'm gone, Nathan learned how to love by watching us. We weren't always good examples. Hal worked too much. I went along with it. We were happy, but we were absent in so many ways. I don't think either of us ever fully admitted that. I keep thinking about that girl, Claire, whom Nathan brought home in March. She had steady eyes, the kind that have seen hard things and decided to stay open to the world anyway. I think she's better for him than he deserves right now. I hope he grows into the man who deserves her. I should write this down properly. I should tell Hal. He never looks at what I leave on the counter, but he looks at what I hand him directly. I always forget to hand it to him. I think I'm going to forget again. There are things you mean to say, and then the days just go by, and then you run out of them. I sat in that empty waiting room, holding Margaret's phone with both hands, while the home renovation show flickered silently in the corner. I felt a very specific kind of grief, the grief of reading a message written for you that arrived too late. She had tried. She wrote it down, which was her way of trying. Then the days got in the way, just as she suspected they would, and she never handed it to me, and I never read it. And now we were here. Mr. Mercer. Dr. Park was standing in the doorway. I stood up so fast my chair scraped hard against the linoleum. "Is she?" "She's fine," Dr. Park said, the words settling like a weight off my shoulders. "He's here. 2:43 a.m. 5 pounds, 14 ounces. A small, genuine smile touched her face. "He came out arguing with someone. Not sure who, but he's got an attitude." My throat locked up completely. "Can I?" I managed. "Come on," she said. The delivery room was warmer than the hallway. Someone had thought to turn up the thermostat. In that moment, even that small kindness hit me hard. The lights had been dimmed from the harsh glare of the corridor to a softer glow, acknowledging that what had taken place in this room wasn't just a medical procedure but a beginning. Claire was propped up in the raised bed, her hair damp against her forehead, a thin hospital blanket pulled up to her waist. She looked like someone who had just finished a marathon and won, exhausted beyond words, but illuminated from within. A nurse was working quietly at the infant warmer in the corner. Dr. Park stepped aside to let me pass. "Hi," Claire said, her voice raspy and worn, the most honest sound I'd heard in months. "We made it. You made it," I said. "I just drove fast and worried. That's different." She let out a short, broken laugh that turned into a wince, then back into a smile. The nurse turned from the warmer and walked toward me, and before I fully processed what was happening, I took an involuntary step forward. She laid him in my arms. He was wrapped in a standard hospital blanket with blue stripes along the edges, softened by 1,000 washings. He was tiny, so tiny it caught me off guard, even though I already knew his weight. 5 pounds, 14 ounces is just a number until you hold it, and then it becomes something entirely different. Something that fits right in the crook of your arm. Lighter than a bag of flour, yet somehow the heaviest thing you've ever carried. His eyes were closed. His mouth made tiny movements every now and then, like he was practicing a language he hadn't learned to speak yet. His hands were curled into tight little fists against his chest, moved by a fierce, newborn conviction that his fingers belonged in that exact order. I stared at his face for a long time. Then I looked at his left shoulder, where the blanket had slipped down just a fraction. There was a tiny mark on his skin, an irregular oval about the size of a thumbprint, a soft brownish pink against his fresh, flushed skin. I have that exact same birthmark on my left shoulder. So did my father, and as far as anyone knew, so did his. Nathan didn't have it, but this child, Claire's son, the grandson I didn't even know existed 4 days ago, carried it into the world. A sudden tightness choked my throat, something I couldn't handle with any grace, so I didn't even try to hide it. "Hey," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Hey, Lucas." I adjusted my arm slightly, bringing him just a fraction closer. "I'm your granddad. I know we're meeting a little later than we should have. That's on me, and I'm sorry." I paused, breathing in the quiet of the room. "But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. I don't make promises lightly, but I'm making this one to you." His mouth stopped its little movements. I don't know if a newborn, 3 minutes into the world, after a 5-hour labor at 2 in the morning, can actually respond to a voice. But in that moment, it felt like he was listening, and I wasn't about to argue with the feeling. Claire let out a sound from the bed. Not a word, just a fragile breath. When I looked up, tears were overflowing, spilling over her cheeks like water breaching a dam. "He has the mark," she said. "He has the mark," I confirmed. She covered her face with both hands and truly began to cry, her shoulders shaking as she let go. Everything she had held back for 7 months came out in one long, trembling breath. I stood there holding Lucas, letting her cry without trying to stop her. Some things just have to run their course. After a moment, she lowered her hands and wiped her face with the back of her wrist, taking a long, unsteady breath. "What do we do now?" she asked. I looked down at Lucas. One of his little fists uncurled slightly, pointing a tiny finger toward nothing in particular, or maybe toward everything. "Right now," I said. I'm going to make sure anyone who shouldn't be through that door never gets close to it. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. I carefully shifted Lucas to one arm and pulled out the phone with my free hand. Nathan Mercer. A phone call, not a text. I declined it. A text came through a second later. I know she's there. I know about the baby. Old man, you have until tomorrow morning to make this right. Otherwise, I will. My arm tightened around Lucas just a fraction. Not enough to disturb him, just enough to feel his weight, real, solid, and present right here. I typed back 3 words. Come on then. I'm ready. At 4:15 a.m., I left Ohio Health Riverside Hospital. Roy drove me back home without asking a single question. That was exactly what I needed. I broke my own rule and sat in the front passenger seat. Something I almost never do. I watched the streets of Columbus slide by in that specific amber silence of a weekday early morning. At this hour, the city belonged to shift workers, insomniacs, and men who had just become grandfathers for the first time. When we pulled up to the house on Elmwood Avenue, I thanked Roy and told him to go home and get some sleep. He said he'd be back at 7. I told him he didn't need to be. He said he knew, but he'd be there anyway, and drove off. I went inside and brewed real coffee. The tin from my cabinet the beans Nathan had never touched. I sat at the kitchen table and called Detective Karen Walsh at 4:30 a.m. She answered on the second ring. Lucas is here, I said. 5 pounds, 14 ounces. Mother and baby are safe at Riverside under a non-disclosure protocol. Good, she said, her voice completely sharp, telling me she hadn't really been sleeping anyway. Are you ready to move this morning? I am, I said. I'll call Nathan at 7. Tell him I had a rough night and ask him to come over to talk about what happens to the company. I paused. He'll come. He's been waiting for me to show weakness for too long. He won't suspect a thing. I'll have 2 officers in position by 6:30, she said. I'll be in the hallway behind the kitchen. Once you give the word, we move. The word is Lucas, I said. A brief silence on the line. Understood, she said. Get some rest if you can. I didn't rest. Instead, I went to the locked cabinet in my office and pulled out the accordion file I had secured the night before. I brought it to the kitchen table, opened it beneath the overhead light, and went through every single document one last time. Not to look for errors. Paula didn't make errors. But because I needed to hold every piece of evidence in my hands, to remember what it represented before using it. 14 wire transfer records. A 43-page forensic accounting report. Dr. Howell's medical files and my blood panel results. The original ultrasound photo and Claire's letter. Eddie's surveillance photos of Nathan entering the estate attorney's office on Sunday afternoon. A printed copy of the insurance beneficiary modification agreement, with Nathan's digital signature and timestamp. $1.2 million stolen through shell companies Wakanti, registered under his girlfriend's mother. A $15 million life insurance policy transferred to his name, filed the very week he started dissolving pills in my coffee. I stacked everything back into the folder, placed it in the center of the kitchen table, and walked to the window. No, the sky over Elmwood Avenue was beginning to lighten at the edges. That thin, pale gray before true dawn, when the darkness gives up, but the light hasn't fully arrived. I had stood at this window and watched this sky for 31 years. Margaret used to say the best thing about living in Ohio was that you always knew what the weather intended to do. It was never subtle about its plans. She meant it as a mild complaint, but I'd always taken it as a point of pride. At 7 o'clock sharp, I called Nathan. Dad, he answered on the very first ring, telling me he had been awake, waiting. I tried reaching you last night, he said. I know, I said, letting my voice carry just the right amount of fatigue. Not overdone, just the genuine exhaustion of a man who had been up since midnight, which was the absolute truth. It was a rough night, son. I need you to come over this morning. I want to talk about what happens to the business if I'm not around much longer. I let the sentence hang in the air. Please come. A pause. A bag. I could hear his breathing on the line. I'll be there in an hour, he said. He made it in 53 minutes, showing just how eagerly he had been waiting for that call. When he walked into the kitchen through the back door, I was sitting at the table. The accordion folder sat in front of me, my hands resting flat on top of it. My mug of real coffee was cooling to my right. I hadn't touched the coffee Nathan brought this morning. The act was over. He stepped into the room and stopped cold. His eyes went from the folder to me, then back to the folder. What's that? He asked. Sit down, Nathan, I said. The expression on his face shifted, a rapid recalibration. Like a man walking into a room expecting one thing and finding something completely different. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down, slowly, his eyes glued to the file. You look better this morning, he said cautiously. I thought you said you had a rough night. I lied, I said. I've been doing a lot of that lately, practicing. I looked him straight in the eyes. You taught me how important it is. His jaw tightened. Dad, Paula Hines finished her report 2 days ago, I said. I opened the file and slid the first document across the table. 14 wire transfers over 18 months. 1. $2 million moved through 3 LLCs registered under Sandra Cole's name. Every single one authorized by your signature. I slid the next document over. Dr. James Howell's medical report. My blood amlodipine levels were 3 to 4 times the therapeutic dose, a pattern consistent with 10 weeks of daily exposure. The coffee sample came back positive. Another document. The insurance beneficiary modification agreement. $15 million. Submitted the exact week my dizziness started getting severe. I laid my hands flat on the table. Do you want to keep listening, or do you have any questions? Nathan sat completely frozen. The color drained from his face in a way I had never seen before. Not the red flush of anger I had expected, but a genuine, hollow pale, as if the blood had fled his skin entirely, leaving him looking empty under the kitchen lights. How long have you known? He asked, his voice stripped down to a hollow quiet I barely recognized. Long enough, I said. He covered his face with both hands and dragged them down slowly. When he lowered them, the expression left on his face wasn't something I was prepared for. It wasn't defiance or more excuses, but a raw, exhausted collapse. Like a structure under load for too long finally passing its breaking point. I didn't. He started, then stopped. Diana said those doses were safe. She said it would just make you tired. Tired enough to sign the paperwork. Tired enough to go along with the transition. He looked up at me, his eyes rimmed with red. I swear to God, Dad, I didn't know she was trying to... Nathan, my voice came out low and flat. Shut your mouth. He went quiet. I found your note, I said. The one you wrote when you were 19, a man who builds things that last. You wrote that. I looked at him. What happened to the boy who wrote those words? Nathan flinched as if he'd been struck. For a second, his face broke completely, ugly and exposed. The face of a man asked the one question he couldn't answer and couldn't run from. He raised a hand to cover his eyes, his shoulders hunching forward as a quiet, broken breath escaped him. "I don't know," he whispered into his palm. "I don't know, Dad. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Lucas Harold Mercer was born at 2:43 this morning," I said. 5 pounds, 14 ounces. He has our family birthmark. Nathan's hand slid down from his face. He stared at me, blank. "You have a son," I said. "And because of what you and Diana did." He came into this world in an emergency room. After his mother, I spent 4 months hiding in a room above a diner, while his grandfather didn't even know he existed. I let the weight of that sit in the room before I spoke again. Lucas. From the hallway behind the kitchen, Detective Karen Walsh stepped into the doorway. Nathan turned his head at the sound of her footsteps as 2 uniformed officers appeared behind her. "Nathan Mercer," Walsh said, holding her badge, her voice carrying that quiet authority of someone who had done this 100 times and took no pleasure in it. "I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of financial fraud, grand theft, and criminal poisoning. Please stand up and put your hands where I can see them." Nathan stood up. He didn't fight it. He looked at me one last time across the kitchen table, across the folder, across the coffee mug, through the morning light coming through the window I'd looked out of for 31 years. "Was any of it real?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Did you ever actually?" "I loved you every single day of your life," I said. "Even today. That's why this is the hardest thing I've ever had to do." The handcuffs clicked shut. The police led Nathan out the front door at 8:51 a.m. I stood by the kitchen window, watching the cruiser pull away from the curb on Elmwood Avenue. After it turned the corner and disappeared, I stood there for another minute, because my legs decided sitting down was the only logical response to the last 6 hours, and I was inclined to agree with them. Detective Walsh walked back inside after seeing her officers off. "What about Diana Cole?" I asked. "Eddie Cross flagged her for the Columbus Airport Authority last night," Walsh said, placing her folder on the counter. "She booked a one-way ticket to Miami under her own name, which shows you how confident she was that this morning was going to go differently." She looked at me calmly. "They picked her up at the gate at 7:40 a.m. She had 2 checked bags and a laptop. The laptop's already been flagged for forensic investigation." I pictured Diana sitting at the gate with her bags packed, confident that by this time today I would have signed whatever paperwork Nathan put in front of me, or been too weak to stop it. I thought about her patient, calculating pattern, the LLCs, the previous companies, years of practice, and felt a cold, impersonal realization. Some people are simply built to dismantle what others build, and they spend their lives looking for new places to do it. "Good," I said. That was all I felt toward Diana Cole. Walsh gathered her files and paused by the door. "The prosecutor's office will need a formal statement from you later this week. Paula Hines' report and Dr. Howell's records are the cleanest evidence package I've seen in years. This won't be a complicated case." She looked at me with something that wasn't quite sympathy, but close enough. "You did the right thing, Mr. Mercer." "I did it late," I said. She thought about that for a second. "Late is still better than 6 feet under." She turned and left. I sat back down at the kitchen table. The accordion folder was still open in front of me. I had carried those documents around for days. The entire blueprint Nathan and Diana had constructed to tear my life down. I gathered the pages into order, tied the folder shut, and set it by the door for Walsh's office. Then I called Frank Delgado. He answered on the 3rd ring the background noise of an air wrench going quiet as he picked up. "It's done," I said. "They got both of them." A pause on the line. "Good." Frank used the exact same word I'd used for Diana, with the exact same weight behind it. "Frank," I paused, taking a breath, "I have a proposal for you. And it's not an apology. I'm done trying to make up for something that can't be undone. This is separate." I looked out the kitchen window at the bare November yard. "I need an operations director at Mercer Freight. Someone who actually knows how the work gets done. Someone I trust to tell me when I'm making a mistake." I paused. "The pay is real, and the title is real. You can say no, and it won't change a thing between us." The air wrench hummed again somewhere in his shop, then stopped. "Send me the job description," Frank said. "I'll read it over." "That's all I'm asking," I said. I hung up and sat in the quiet kitchen for a while. The coffee in my mug was completely cold, but I drank it anyway. Then I drove to Ohio Health Riverside Hospital. When I walked into the room, Claire was awake, propped up in bed with Lucas resting against her chest, his face tucked into her neck. They both shared that specific peace that comes only to people who have survived a trial together and made it to the other side. She looked up as I pushed the door open. "How did it go?" she asked. "Nathan is in custody," I said. "Diana was arrested at the airport this morning. It's over." She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them. Her chin trembled once before she bit her lip to steady it. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay." I pulled a chair up to the bedside and sat down. Lucas shifted slightly at the movement, making a small adjustment, his tiny fist opening and closing against Claire's shoulder. "There's something I want to ask you," I said. "You don't have to answer now. You don't have to answer at all if you don't want to." She looked at me. "Listening, I want to start the legal process to make you and Lucas my family under the law," I said, "officially and permanently, both of you." I met her eyes. "Margaret would have wanted it. But more than that, or I want it, because you're the one who kept this family from disappearing completely. You belong here just as much as I do." Claire looked down at Lucas for a long time. When she looked back up, her eyes were swimming with tears again, but different from the night before. Last night was relief. This was something else. A quiet, unpretentious start to truly belonging. "Yes," she said. "I'd like that, Hal." Spring came late to Columbus that year. The last traces of snow in the yard didn't fully melt until the third week of March, and even then it receded reluctantly, clinging to the shady corners along the fence line. While everything else thawed, that gray line of slush held on for 2 stubborn weeks. By early April, though, the maple trees in the front yard finally made up their minds. The first leaves broke through. Tiny, bright, unapologetic green, the kind of color only newborn things carry. I noticed them through the kitchen window on a Tuesday morning, while brewing coffee, and it struck me that I hadn't noticed leaves budding in 3 years. Not since Margaret passed. I had lived through 2 springs completely blind to them, so busy acting out my own slow decline that I failed to see anything new taking root. The legal proceedings wrapped up in mid-March. Nathan pleaded guilty to all charges: financial fraud, grand theft, and criminal poisoning. The assistant district attorney told me Paula's evidence package was the cleanest she had seen in 11 years of prosecuting financial crimes. Nathan was sentenced to 17 years, with parole eligibility after 12. I accepted the outcome without bitterness. He was my son, and I loved him. I hoped, 12 years would be enough for him to find the boy who had written those 9 words on a piece of notebook paper at 19. I didn't attend the sentencing. I stayed home with Lucas. Diana Cole received 13 years on consolidated charges: fraud, conspiracy, criminal poisoning, alongside 3 revived claims in Akron and Hamilton County, tied to her previous ventures, brought back by the DA's office using Paula's documentation. A woman who had spent years learning how to dismantle what others built would now have plenty of time to reconsider her methods. I didn't think much about Diana Cole after that. Some files you simply close, lock in the cabinet, and leave behind. The legal process to formally adopt Claire and recognize Lucas as my legal heir was finalized in the first week of April. The court decree read, Claire Sutton Mercer and Lucas Harold Mercer. The attorney handling the case, a woman named Barbara Keene who had handled family court in Columbus for 22 years, teared up as she handed me the final papers and apologized. I told her there was no need to apologize. I had the document framed and hung it in the hallway, right beside the photo from Put-in Bay. During the second week of April, on a Wednesday afternoon when the lunch rush had cleared and the diner had settled into its quiet shift, I drove down to Rosie's Bakery alone. The booths were empty, and the coffee machine hummed softly in the background. Linda Zhao was behind the counter restocking pies. She looked up as I walked in, set down her spatula, and waited. I took a stool at the counter, skipping the corner booth. Not today. Not for this. I laid my hands flat on the counter. I owe you something I don't know how to properly calculate, I said. When my daughter-in-law had nowhere to go, you gave her a place to sleep. When she needed to feel self-reliant, you gave her a job. Without knowing who I was or if any of this made sense, you protected her for 4 months. I met Linda's eyes. I know you didn't do it for me. You did it for her. But your help kept her safe until the day she could find me. I need you to understand what that means. Linda looked at me for a long moment with the steady, unsentimental expression of a woman who had run a diner for 22 years and seen every walk of life pass through her doors. She's a good girl, Linda said simply. You don't need any reason beyond that. You're right, I said. I reached into my jacket and placed a sealed envelope on the counter between us. That's a buyout offer for Rosie's Bakery at full market value, based on an independent appraisal. The terms include a lifetime management contract. You run the place as long as you want, exactly as it is. The only thing that changes is the name on the deed. I kept my hand on the envelope. You can say no. I won't be offended, and it won't change a thing. But I want you to have the choice never to worry about a landlord selling the building out from under you again. Linda looked at the envelope, then looked up at me. How did you know I was renting? She asked. I asked around, I said. She picked up the envelope, turning it over in her hands without opening it. Then she set it back down and poured me a cup of coffee. Real coffee, not decaf, and slid it across the counter. I'll have my nephew look at it, she said. He's a paralegal. That's all I'm asking, I said. I drank the coffee. It was good. The best cup I'd had in a long time. I realized it had less to do with the brew itself, and everything to do with finally being able to drink it without wondering what was inside. On the second Saturday of April, Claire's parents drove up from West Virginia. Doug and Patty Sutton arrived in a 10-year-old Subaru, carrying 2 casserole dishes and a handmade blanket for Lucas. They brought with them the bright relief of people who had spent months terrified for their daughter and were finally beginning to believe the nightmare was over. Doug was 62, a tall, quiet man with the same steady eyes as Claire. He took my hand in both of his and said, "Thank you," a simple phrase carrying everything that needed to be said. Patty was smaller and far more vocal, crying twice within 10 minutes of walking through the door. First when she saw Claire, and again when Claire placed Lucas in her arms. Frank Delgado arrived at noon, still in his work clothes. He'd spent the morning at the warehouse handling an inventory audit during his first week as operations director at Mercer Freight, volunteering his time past Friday. He nodded to me as he came in through the back door and accepted the coffee Claire offered him. Then he spent 20 minutes talking freight logistics with Doug, who had driven trucks for 17 years before his knees gave out. The two of them hit it off instantly, speaking the shared language of men who knew the road. The afternoon turned warm and clear. I sat out in the yard with Lucas on my lap. At 5 weeks old, he had recently discovered that the world contained things worth looking at, and he was pursuing that discovery with absolute seriousness. His dark eyes tracked the leaves, swaying in the April breeze, with the intense focus of a scientist studying a new phenomenon. Claire sat in the chair beside me, her shoulder close to mine, not quite touching, but near enough that I could feel her presence. From inside the house came the sound of Patty washing dishes, and Doug telling Frank about highway grades in West Virginia, with Frank responding in a voice of genuine interest. "Frank seems like a good man," Claire said. "He's exactly what the company needs," I said. "Someone who'll tell me I'm wrong before I drive us off a cliff." She smiled out toward the yard. "Margaret would have liked him. Margaret would have fed him 3 meals and asked about his family," I said. "In that exact order." Claire laughed, a real open laugh from deep inside. Lucas raised his head at the sound. I looked down at him. He was looking up at his mother, surrounded by the memory of the grandmother whose name he would one day learn, sitting in the yard that had held my life for 31 years. A life built brick by brick, contract by contract, morning by morning. I looked at the leaves I had finally remembered to notice. I spent 35 years building Mercer Freight, warehouses, contracts, trucks, accounts, things made of metal, paper, and handshakes. I believed that was the foundation, the stuff that lasted. But the little boy sitting on my lap, weighing 5 pounds, 14 ounces, carried a mark on his shoulder that connected him to people he would never meet. He looked at his mother with an absolute, unproven trust. The trust of someone who had arrived in the world already knowing where home was. "Margaret!" I whispered into the quiet air, to no one and everyone all at once. "I think I finally understand what you were trying to tell me." The April breeze drifted through the maples. The leaves turned in the wind, bright, new, and unapologetically green. I held my grandson, staying right where I was, not going anywhere. Looking back on everything that happened, I keep coming back to a simple truth that took me 67 years to fully understand. You can build a fortune with your own 2 hands, but you can never buy back the moments you were too busy to notice. I'm not proud of the father I used to be. I gave Nathan everything except the one thing that mattered most: my actual presence. I was in that house, but I was never really in his world. A child who grows up looking at an empty chair eventually learns to fill it with dangerous things. Don't make the mistake I made. Don't measure your worth by the size of your company or the balance in your bank account. Measure it by whether the people who need you actually feel you there. I learned that lesson almost too late, at the cost of losing a son twice, first to absence, then to the courts. I believe truth surfaces when it needs to. Not a moment early, but just in time to save what matters. That's the only way I can explain why Claire found me on that specific Friday night, at that specific diner, with that notebook tucked in her apron pocket. These stories aren't just for entertainment. They exist because someone out there needs to hear them. This story isn't about anger. It's about what happens when love arrives late, but justice arrives right on time. If there's anything worth passing down from all of this, it's this: protect the people in front of you before life forces you to go looking for them. If Hal's journey resonated with you, leave a comment and tell me what you would have done in his shoes. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And if these words brought something meaningful to your week, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Thank you for staying with me until the end. A gentle reminder: some details in this account have been dramatized for narrative clarity and reflection. If this style of storytelling isn't for you, feel free to seek out what speaks to your heart. No hard feelings and certainly no judgment.